began before sunrise in the heart of the Midwest. Sirens echoed across Chicago's suburbs as convoys of federal vehicles rolled through the rain-slick streets. Agents in tactical gear faces hidden beneath visors surrounded apartment complexes, warehouses, and motel parking lots. By dawn, the Department of Homeland Security had executed one of the largest coordinated enforcement operations in modern American history. Operation Midway Blitz had begun. Over 1,000 undocumented immigrants were arrested across Illinois in a single week, a sweep that officials described as the decisive strike in the war for America's interior security. Led by ICE and the U.S. Border Patrol, the mission targeted individuals with prior criminal records, probation violations, or standing deportation orders. According to Reuters, the arrests spanned from Chicago's South Side to Rockford and Joliet, each location chosen through predictive analytics linking crime reports, prior warrants, and biometric data. Homeland Security framed the operation as both tactical and symbolic. It was named in memory of Katie Abraham, a 32-year-old Illinois teacher killed in a drunk driving crash by a repeat offender who had been deported twice. Her death sparked outraged protests and a demand from President Donald Trump for what he called unapologetic enforcement in the name of justice. America's compassion will never come at the expense of its safety, Trump declared from the White House press room. Those who violate our borders and our laws will face removal, swift, lawful, and permanent. The statement set the tone for the largest interior operation since the early 2020s. BBC News described the scene as a show of force unseen since the post-9/11 era, with ICE teams using aerial surveillance, AI-driven mapping, and real-time coordination from DHS's Illinois Command Center. DW analysts compared it to counter-terror sweeps once deployed in European capitals, noting the fusion of intelligence and enforcement once reserved for foreign threats. Assistant DHS Secretary Tricia McLaughlin called the mission the restoration of deterrence. She claimed that nearly half of those arrested had prior convictions for domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, armed robbery, and gang activity. Among them were members of MS-13 and Venezuela's Tren de Aragua, two groups Washington now classifies as transnational terrorist entities. But not all arrests fit that description. The Guardian reported that some detainees were minor offenders, men and women caught after expired visas, probation slips, or missed hearings. In Chicago's Pilsen district, families awoke to find relatives missing and front doors splintered. Outside ICE's Broadview Processing Center, protesters gathered chanting, "We are not the enemy." By afternoon 14 were detained for obstruction. Al Jazeera noted that the images from Illinois mirrored a growing global pattern, democracies adopting military precision to police civil life. Drones circled above suburban neighborhoods as biometric vans scanned faces at intersections, tools once designed for war zones now recalibrated for immigration control. For supporters, it was proof that Trump's national security restoration initiative had reached full force. For critics, it was evidence that America's open society was closing one door at a time. And as night fell on Chicago, flashing lights reflected off wet pavement, while federal agents logged names into encrypted databases that stretched from Washington to El Paso. 1,000 arrests, one operation, and a single message echoed through the nation's arteries. The borders may begin at the edges of a map, but their defense now runs through every American street. Yet behind the applause and outrage, one question burned through the cold Illinois dawn: when law enforcement turns inward to protect a nation who protects the conscience of that nation itself. Every operation begins with a story, and this one began with tragedy. The name Katie Abraham now echoes through congressional hearings, cable broadcasts, and White House briefings. A 32-year-old school teacher from Aurora, Illinois, she was killed in April 2025 by a drunk driver who had been deported twice before, but slipped back into the country through Texas. Her death ignited national outrage and transformed into a rallying cry for a new era of enforcement. President Donald Trump, already campaigning on restoring American order, seized on her case as proof that sanctuary policies had gone too far. "One life lost to illegal negligence is one too many," he declared during a televised address. Within weeks, the Department of Homeland Security drafted Operation Midway Blitz, named not just for Chicago's Midway District, but for a battle that changed the course of World War II. The metaphor was deliberate. America, Trump said, must win its interior wars the way it once won its oceans. According to Reuters, DHS compiled over 3,000 high-risk profiles drawn from ICE, FBI, and local law enforcement databases. Priority targets were individuals with convictions or open warrants for sexual assault, armed robbery, kidnapping, and violent gang activity. Each was mapped using biometric data, facial recognition, and AI-assisted geolocation systems first tested during Border Patrol operations in Arizona. The BBC reported that intelligence analysts inside DHS's Illinois command hub called this the most data-driven domestic enforcement in American history. DW described it as the point where policing meets precision warfare. Helicopter thermal scans replaced patrol cars. Tactical AI replaced intuition. Every arrest became a node in a vast algorithm of deterrence. The political narrative was equally calculated. Trump's media advisors framed the operation as a moral campaign justice for Katie Justice for victims forgotten by what they called the politics of sanctuary. In a fiery speech in Peoria, Trump promised the rebirth of Federal Resolve branding sanctuary jurisdictions as safe harbors for predators. But in Chicago, the message landed differently. Mayor Lydia Alvarez, a vocal critic of the administration, accused DHS of weaponizing grief. The president uses tragedy as permission to tear families apart, she said, during an emergency city council meeting broadcast by Al Jazeera. Her words fueled protests outside the Broadview processing site, where demonstrators clashed with federal officers. Dozens were detained. The Guardian noted that even among law enforcement professionals, unease was growing. Several Illinois sheriffs complained anonymously that they had been pressured to cooperate despite local sanctuary ordinances. Refusal, one said, would have meant losing federal funding. Compliance meant losing community trust. Still, for supporters, the results spoke louder than the debate. In the first 48 hours, ICE and Border Patrol captured nearly 600 repeat offenders, including known MS-13 and Tren de Aragua enforcers. Defense News reported that intelligence from seized phones linked some suspects to human smuggling routes extending into Texas, Florida, and New Jersey, evidence that cartels had embedded cells across the continental U.S. Inside the White House, Trump's aides called it proof that domestic security could no longer be localized. The border is everywhere, said DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. Every state must now defend itself as if it were the first line of defense. For families of victims like Katie Abraham, the operation was justice delayed but delivered. Her parents attended a press conference in Washington where they stood beside Trump as he signed an executive memorandum expanding DHS's authority over sanctuary jurisdictions. "We are protecting every family like ours," her father said, tears cutting through resolve. But as her mother quietly added, justice never feels clean. The words lingered longer than the applause because even as the nation celebrated a moral victory, another question surfaced. When justice becomes a campaign, does compassion still have a place in the equation? Behind the headlines and human stories, Operation Midway Blitz was a masterclass in 21st century enforcement, a fusion of intelligence, surveillance, and coordination, unlike anything seen in domestic law. It was the physical manifestation of President Donald Trump's 2025 doctrine, Homeland First Total Control. According to Reuters, the operation's architecture was built months in advance by a joint command task force uniting ICE, U.S. Border Patrol, and the Homeland Security Intelligence Directorate. Its hub was an underground fusion center west of Chicago, where analysts worked alongside AI systems, tracking suspects across hundreds of miles. Every phone ping, car tag, and biometric scan fed into Project Helios, a classified DHS database adapted from battlefield surveillance platforms once deployed in Iraq. Defense News reported that Project Helios operated through layered oversight high-altitude drones, monitored convoys, facial recognition cameras, scanned public spaces, and predictive software cross-checked social media posts against criminal networks. Its counter-terror strategy turned domestic, said one DHS engineer anonymously. "We used to watch for insurgents in Fallujah. Now we're tracking fugitives in Cicero." That blend of technology and authority blurred the distinction between civilian policing and military precision. DW called it a new theater of internal warfare. By integrating the Joint Terrorism Task Force database, agents could flag individuals with past travel to cartel-affiliated regions even without active warrants. Every field team carried AR smart tablets linking live drone feeds to facial data, turning arrests into synchronized real-time operations. BBC News noted that the logistical command mimicked NATO's digital war rooms, one screen displaying Chicago's southwest sector, another tracing patterns of movement in Rockford. Supervisors called it urban containment. The term, once used in counterinsurgency manuals, had found new meaning on American soil. The policy framework behind it stemmed from Trump's National Security Restoration Initiative, which redefined violent illegal offenders as non-state hostile actors. This classification, confirmed by The Guardian, allows federal agencies to bypass certain procedural restrictions in the name of national defense. To supporters, it represents necessary evolution. To critics, it's a dangerous elasticity of power. Assistant DHS Secretary Tricia McLaughlin defended the approach, saying we're using every tool we once reserved for war because the cartels brought the war here. Her statement resonated with Trump's base, who viewed the operation as proof of restored sovereignty. But civil rights advocates warned that once intelligence structures expand inward, they rarely contract. Al Jazeera reported that several ICE agents privately expressed discomfort with the new tactics, describing them as military optics for domestic theater. Drones over suburban rooftops unnerved even those who supported enforcement. We can't fight cartels with the same paranoia they use, one agent said. Still, the system delivered results. Within days, the network identified dozens of cartel-linked ghost addresses, safe houses disguised as trucking depots and repair shops. Intercepted communications later leaked to Reuters revealed direct coordination between Illinois cells and operatives in Texas and New Jersey, forming a cross-state supply line for methamphetamine and counterfeit IDs. As arrests mounted, federal officials declared success. Crime metrics dropped sharply, narcotics seizures surged, but the more efficient the system became, the less visible its limits appeared. Predictive policing doesn't recognize innocence, cautioned a DW analyst. It recognizes patterns, and sometimes patterns lie. The moral tension reached Washington. In a closed Senate briefing, lawmakers from both parties questioned whether the operation's AI protocols had undergone judicial review. None had. If data defines guilt, one senator asked who defines the data. Trump's response was unapologetic. America has spent decades looking outward for enemies. It's time to look within. And so the border blurred again, no longer a line on a map, but a network drawn through the veins of every state, every street, every home. The strategy worked, but as the drones circled silently above the Illinois sky, one question refused to fade. When a nation perfects control, what imperfection remains to remind it that it is still free? By the third day of Operation Midway Blitz, the victories on paper had collided with the realities on the ground. Chicago, already a city divided by politics, became a stage for confrontation between the federal government and local leaders determined to defend their sanctuary policies. According to BBC News, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the ICE Broadview Processing Center, waving banners that read, "No human is illegal," as convoys of federal vans passed behind police barricades. Tensions rose when demonstrators tried to block the main gate, leading to more than a dozen arrests. In the chaos, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and her staff attempting to enter the facility for a press briefing were denied access to a government restroom, a minor incident that spiraled into national headlines. Conservative outlets framed it as liberal hostility toward law enforcement, while The Guardian described it as a snapshot of America's fractured soul. President Donald Trump, addressing reporters that afternoon, condemned Chicago officials for harboring criminals under the false flag of compassion. His administration accused Illinois of deliberately obstructing federal operations, citing local police departments that refused to share arrest data or honor detainers. "Sanctuary is over," Trump said. "Every city that resists the law is defying the nation." According to Reuters, the Justice Department is now considering legal action against municipalities deemed non-cooperative jurisdictions, a move that could withhold federal funding from cities like Chicago, San Francisco, and New York. The policy, dubbed the Interstate Accountability Directive, would extend Trump's 2025 enforcement vision, treating local resistance not as policy disagreement, but as a breach of national security. The escalation revealed a deeper conflict over control. DW observed that Midway Blitz was no longer just an immigration operation. It was a constitutional stress test, a live experiment in how far Washington could reach into local governance. Illinois Governor Mara Sanchez, standing beside Chicago's mayor, accused Trump of turning law enforcement into an occupying force. Her statement was met with applause at a City Hall press conference, but condemnation from the White House. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera reported that within the first 72 hours, at least 120 minors were temporarily separated from adult family members pending identity verification, a policy ICE described as standard procedure. Activists called it collective punishment. The footage of crying children outside Broadview spread globally, reigniting debates over America's moral compass. Inside, DHS command officials remained unapologetic. "Our priority is public safety, not public opinion," said Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin during a briefing later aired by DW. She emphasized that nearly 60% of those arrested had prior violent convictions, including gang members linked to MS-13 18th Street and Tren de Aragua. "Every one of those offenders is one less threat to an American family," she said. But civil liberties advocates argued that the operation's efficiency masked its overreach. The Guardian quoted legal scholar Dr. Evan Marcus, who warned that when enforcement becomes omnipresent, discretion dies quietly. Courts are now flooded with motions challenging the legality of mass warrants issued under DHS's predictive systems. Some judges privately admitted to Reuters that they signed papers faster than they could read them. For many Chicago residents, the operation has redrawn invisible boundaries. Neighborhoods once united by faith or language are now divided by fear. BBC News interviewed a mother from Little Village who said, "My son stopped going to school. He says every police car feels like a border patrol." And yet, amid the uproar, supporters of Trump's campaign insist the mission has made the city safer. Homicide rates dropped 18% in a month. Drug seizures tripled. On talk radio, callers praise federal agents as warriors cleaning the streets. To them, the protests are noise. The data is proof. Still, DW's closing analysis captured the paradox. Best Chicago has become America's mirror, reflecting both its fear and its faith in control. As night falls over the skyline, helicopters hover like sentinels above the glowing grid of the city. For some, that light means protection. For others, it's a reminder that even in the land of liberty, the watch never ends. And so the question returns sharp as sirens in the dark. Can a democracy that polices its conscience ever truly feel free? The world was watching. When Operation Midway Blitz made international headlines, the reaction from abroad split along familiar lines: admiration and alarm. For allies, it was a showcase of America's unmatched capability to execute large-scale enforcement with precision. For critics, it was a warning that even the world's oldest democracy was beginning to resemble the systems it once condemned. According to Reuters, European leaders discussed the Illinois operation during a closed-door NATO session in Brussels. Defense officials from Poland and Italy privately praised Trump's efficiency in reasserting internal sovereignty, arguing that Europe faces similar threats from organized migration networks. Meanwhile, Germany's DW highlighted concerns that the U.S. crackdown could embolden far-right movements across the continent. When the United States normalizes militarized policing, one German analyst warned Europe listens and imitates. In France, editorialists at Le Monde called the operation an American paradox, freedom fortified by fear. The Guardian's London bureau echoed the sentiment, suggesting that Trump's policies had birthed a new global doctrine: deterrence through visibility. The same drones, data hubs, and biometric gates that once secured borders were now being exported to Europe under urban resilience programs. In Latin America, the reaction was far sharper. Al Jazeera reported outrage in Mexico City, Caracas, and Bogota, where officials accused Washington of weaponizing tragedy for politics. The Venezuelan government condemned the inclusion of the Tren de Aragua gang in U.S. terror designations, calling it an excuse for interventionist posturing. Yet privately, intelligence sources told Reuters that several South American governments have quietly requested access to U.S. facial recognition databases to track their own fugitives. Hypocrisy, it seems, travels both ways. Further east, Beijing's Global Times portrayed Midway Blitz as proof of Western instability, but defense insiders cited by Jane's Defense Weekly revealed that China's Public Security Bureau is studying the operation's digital blueprint to enhance its own Urban Harmony initiative, a mass surveillance system already monitoring 600 million citizens. America builds control in the name of safety, the report noted. China builds safety in the name of control. In the Middle East, parallels were drawn to long-standing counterinsurgency campaigns. Defense News reported that Israel's intelligence units had analyzed Operation Midway Blitz for potential integration into its AI-based border policing near Gaza and Lebanon. Every country is now internalizing its external enemies, observed a retired Israeli general. What America did in Illinois is what we've been doing for decades, seeing threats before they move. Even Ukraine, still enduring Russian bombardments and hybrid warfare, reportedly adopted DHS algorithms to monitor internal sabotage networks. According to DW Kyiv's security analyst, described the U.S. enforcement model as civilian counterintelligence in peacetime, a concept that blurs lines between military readiness and domestic law. Back home, the debate over these global echoes reignited questions about moral authority. How can America preach liberty abroad? Asked The Guardian. When its own streets resemble controlled corridors, Trump's allies dismiss such criticism as elitist moralizing. To them, global imitation proves leadership, not regression. If America didn't lead, said Secretary Kristi Noem, chaos would. Yet the influence is undeniable. Reuters found that at least 17 countries, including Brazil, Hungary, and the Philippines, are in talks with US tech contractors to purchase modified versions of DHS's predictive enforcement software. The algorithms that once tracked undocumented fugitives in Illinois may soon guide police in Rio, Manila, or Budapest. Analysts at DW and BBC News warn that such proliferation could reshape global governance, normalizing surveillance as the default language of democracy. The American Model 1 BBC correspondent concluded isn't just a policy, it's an export. And as this model spreads, the line between emulation and escalation begins to blur. The question haunting every capital now mirrors the one echoing through Chicago's streets. When nations learn to secure everything, what if anything remains worth risking for freedom? Weeks after the last Sirens faded, Operation Midway Blitz left Illinois suspended between triumph and tension. Chicago's skyline glittered as always, but the mood beneath it had changed. Streets once loud with traffic now seemed muted, lined with more cameras than lampposts. Neighborhoods lived in a strange duality, safer yet more watched than ever before. The Department of Homeland Security called the mission a success. Over 1,000 arrests, dozens of fugitives deported, gang activity disrupted, and cartel-linked networks dismantled. Reuters confirmed that violent crime across Cook County dropped 19% in October, while fentanyl seizures tripled. President Donald Trump, flanked by DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and FBI Director Kash Patel, declared in a televised address, "This is what restoring sovereignty looks like. Law, order, and life are sacred again." But beneath the statistics, unease deepened. The Guardian reported growing fears of mission creep, with ICE agents conducting follow-up raids in nearby states under expanded warrants. The boundaries of enforcement were blurring. What began as targeted action was evolving into a continuous campaign. Temporary operations, wrote one legal scholar, have a way of becoming permanent realities. DW analysts described Illinois as the prototype of the controlled state, a testing ground for Trump's broader national security restoration initiative, which merges domestic crime prevention with counter-terror doctrine. Every city, they noted, now functions as a node within a national surveillance grid linked by data drones and federal oversight. Supporters call it vigilance. Critics call it vertical governance. BBC News captured the paradox in a single line. The streets are quieter, but so are the people. Community leaders say residents are afraid to speak publicly, fearing scrutiny even when innocent. Church attendance in Latino districts has dropped sharply, while legal aid hotlines report record calls from U.S. citizens worried about mistaken detention. At a rally in Peoria, Trump brushed aside criticism. "Fear belongs to criminals, not patriots," he said to roaring applause. "If you're lawful, you have nothing to hide." Yet Al Jazeera observed that this logic, safety through transparency, echoes global regimes that once drew condemnation from Washington. China, Russia, and Iran have each used similar rhetoric to justify internal surveillance. Now America's rivals point to Illinois as proof that even democracies eventually trade liberty for control. According to Defense News, DHS is already replicating the Midway model nationwide under Operation Silent Fortress, integrating AI-driven enforcement into the daily functions of 14 federal agencies. Customs databases, TSA screening tools, and interstate traffic sensors are being fused into a single predictive platform. Officials say the system will prevent crime before it happens. Civil rights groups warn it could profile entire communities. Internationally, allies and adversaries alike are adapting. Jane's Defense Weekly reported that Poland, Japan, and Israel have all launched pilot programs inspired by Midway Blitz's rapid deployment model. The technology born in Chicago's suburbs is now reshaping security doctrine across 3 continents. America's power, once projected through diplomacy and deterrence, now radiates through data and design. Yet, as the system strengthens, its moral weight grows heavier. Control, said a retired DHS analyst to Reuters, is addictive. Once you can see everything, you stop asking if you should. In the heart of Chicago, a mural of Katie Abraham now decorates a school wall, her smiling face surrounded by the words, "Justice lives here." Parents bring flowers, children touch the paint, and federal agents drive past in silence. Her death inspired an operation that changed a nation, but the meaning of that change remains unsettled. For some, America has reclaimed its sovereignty. For others, it has redefined it. And as drones circle quietly above the skyline, their red lights blinking like distant stars, a question lingers in the air, one that no data system can answer. If freedom survives only under watch, has it already begun to disappear?